Today we're exploring a new angle from which to look at cybersecurity, and that is anthropology. Lianne Potter, today's guest, takes us on a fascinating dive into the culture of cybersecurity, the habits, the rituals, and the traits that make it a culture or a microculture in the world of tech. Anthropology gives us this incredible ability to zoom in and out of the tiny behaviors that make up the big cultural norms and identities, and of course, our relationships to them, our perception of them, and how they influence everything from how we speak to what we choose in terms of decisions to how we relate to other people. So, Leanne's experience, besides being a cyber anthropologist, is that of a person who is very hands-on, who went through these experiences, who made the most out of them, and who is affecting change in the team that she's part of. I loved her perspective on the many examples that she shared about the blockers that are keeping cybersecurity from becoming a source of innovation and an even more powerful source of positive change. So we talked about behavior and habits and rituals, and also about vocabulary and expectations, and a lot of common experiences that we have in, let's say, other parts of our lives that are just they resemble what we experience in cybersecurity. But sometimes we fail to recognize that we already know this situation, we already know how to handle it and how to treat others and ourselves in that particular context. So I'd like you to keep an open mind and an open heart in this episode because it has so much to offer. And Lianne has so many great examples to share. And one thing that I think you'd be intrigued to discover in this episode is that we're actually mad at the wrong people in cybersecurity. And you're going to see exactly what I mean by this towards the end of this episode. So enjoy, and I can't wait for you to meet Lianne and her experience. I hope you check out her podcast and her work because she's doing really, really great things. So thanks for listening. Leave a review if you want to, and just enjoy. See you soon. Welcome to the Cyber Empathy Podcast, and thank you for the chance to talk to you about your work and about the beautiful marriage that you've kind of officiated between anthropology and cybersecurity and so many other things. So, yay!
Well, thank you for having such an amazing podcast title. What a great idea to base a whole podcast around the idea of cyber empathy, because it is severely lacking, and I'm sure that we will get into that as our discussion develops. But cyber anthropology, I do think anthropology and cybersecurity, anthropology and tech in general, makes excellent bedfellows. But it wasn't always like that. I mean, when I first became an anthropologist, people were like, why are you focusing on digital anthropology? Because that was my specialism. Shouldn't you be going off into a far-flung country or an exotic place and learning all about different cultures that way? I was like, I could feel when I was studying digital anthropology, something interesting was happening in the digital space. So my study was around looking at how communities were built through the virtual sphere. We don't tend to use the word virtual much anymore because we have gotten very used to the idea that our lives are an amalgamation of being, what we would say in the real world and our online personas. But I studied looking at things like Second Life. I'm aging myself dramatically there, which was a platform in which people could build avatars, build houses, have commerce and things like that. And I wanted to understand, do we replicate those same behaviors of society in those environments? And we do. We love to just revert back to Marxist capitalism straight away. And, the understanding of different sort of labor models and how communities are developed and grow. But at the time, people were like, but it's ephemeral, isn't it? It's not real connections. It's not real relationships. But they were. And there was a big debate in the anthropology sector thinking about should we be recording all this information, this online information? One, it's quite vast. There's a lot of stuff going on, but also, is it worth saving? And there's a whole debate around, how do we now, knowing that is so important to save all this information? So you've got the Internet Archive, for example. How do we keep all that information prolonging? Because I can get a papyrus from ancient Egypt and still have access to it. If I have maybe a CD with a load of content on it, or a CD-ROM, should I say, with a load of content on it, I am going to really struggle right now to find where I can actually play that.
Yes.
And if it will still even play. And so there's the ephemeralness, I think, is not the ephemeral of, are these relationships, are these cultures real? They are very much real. The ephemeralness is that we're losing all this information. So you need anthropologists to come in and record this information.
Record it and also help us make sense of it. And when you mentioned that people expected you to kind of go to a far off country and practice your craft, I thought that for many people, cybersecurity is still a far off realm of such myth, legend, obscurity, and all of the symbolism that it carries with it. And it plays such an interesting part in our society and how we relate to these concepts, because how we relate to each of these concepts says something about us, our own preconceptions, our own cultures. This is why I find anthropology fascinating. It was one of my favorite things to study in the university, and it opened my world to such a wonderful way of zooming in and out on cultures and cultural trends and understanding people and connecting their habits to the bigger picture and how they shaped society and our understanding of key concepts like childhood and marriage and love and so many other things. And now we're seeing this kind of cultural evolution in the making around cybersecurity and what that means and what role it plays in society. So I was wondering, what was the, let's say, pivotal moment that made you look at cybersecurity particularly and say, I want to kind of niche down even further and have this, explore the space with now the skills and experience and that trained eye of an anthropologist?
I decided to focus on cyber anthropology. There's a little journey to kind of where I got to there, which is I managed to get a job as an actual digital anthropologist. Brilliant. Doesn't come around very much. And I was working for a charity that looked at solving destitution. And one of the things that I was seeing in my work was the reason why people couldn't get out of destitution was because of their inability to access online services. And it was known as something called the digital divide. So if you're excluded from accessing online sources, so thinking like housing benefit, worker benefits, rights, healthcare and things like that, education, then you will be socially disadvantaged in some way. And I wanted to be able to have an influence on the digital divide in a practical way. So I taught myself how to code. And then I managed to get myself as a job as a software developer. And I carried on the digital anthropology piece through my software development work. So every time I built something, I would say, right, let's think about the cultural impact this will have on our audience. Like, who is the audience? What are their surroundings? How are they interacting with this piece of technology? How will they share this technology amongst their own community? And while I was being a software developer, I noticed another cultural, I would call it maybe an anomaly. So when I was a software developer, I worked in teams where it was all about innovation, doing the right thing, working at pace, being very creative, being very flexible, only really limited by your imagination. But there was always one team that would always put the brakes on that, and that was the cybersecurity team. And they always felt like blockers. I always thought it's very interesting. I'm working in this environment because the workplace is a cultural environment. Every time we, either we go into the office or log in at a certain time, we all do that as a cultural event. And I was noticing that there was this microculture in this organization, the cybersecurity team, that were unlike anyone else. And so my anthropology spider senses were tingling. And I thought, I must find out I must find out why this is. Like, what's I understood the reasoning behind it, and to be safe, to be secure, why we would get challenged on some of the behaviors we would exhibit. If I be so bold to say, in our software development tribe. But we were all supposed to be one unit, team organization, village organization, if you would. And so I became fascinated with what was their motivations, and I wanted to basically do some participant observation, which is one of the main key components in an anthropologist's toolbox. Participant observation is the research method for really understanding a culture, and the wording is very key. Participant, you are literally a part of that group. Some say you even shed yourself, as in you remove your identity completely so you can be a part of that group, and you take on all the cultural mores, all the kind of vernacular that goes in with that group, and become a part of that group. And that helps you remove biases and things like that, so that you're not imprinting your own cultural background onto them. And then observation, it's active observation. So asking you, because you're participating, you're an active observer. So it's not just standing in the corner and going, I wonder what they're doing. This isn't the zoo. You're actually, really taking part of that culture. And so I begged for a year for the cybersecurity team to let me in. And eventually they did. And I have been there ever since. And I've been studying why cybersecurity teams are the way they are. Now, not everyone is the same. That would be quite bad of me as an anthropologist to say that all cybersecurity teams are the same. But there are definitely some cultural markers in most cybersecurity teams that are replicated, that I've seen in my time as working in cybersecurity, but also as a consultant advising on how to use cyber anthropology in organizations. So speaking to the cybersecurity teams in those organizations, speaking to peers and things like that. There is definitely interesting cultural ceremonies. There's definitely vernacular ways of working that all kind of are fed in to the big cybersecurity machine, which then feeds down and touches everyone else in the organization. But not only that, I don't just focus wholly on cybersecurity in organizations. I'm also interested in cybersecurity in terms of me as a civilian, and we don't all just live and work as organizational worker bees. We have our work life and we have our personal life, and cybersecurity impacts both of those. And it's really interesting how, for example, cultural media messages have slowly been impacted regarding cybersecurity, slowly been impacting how, I say civilians have been engaging with the cybersecurity narrative, both in good ways and bad ways. So it's been an interesting journey.
It definitely sounds like it. And I appreciate how I feel like cybersecurity can be such a strong kind of a glue between our professional and personal lives, because it is exercise in awareness. And I don't mean like cybersecurity awareness in the sense of cybersecurity education, but rather in self-awareness and in understanding our own reactions and mechanisms, and getting that outsider's perspective on our behavior and our like automatic reflexes that we use to survive and thrive in society. And I was wondering, since you mentioned that there are some clearly like replicable traits that security teams have, what would you say are like the three most recurring ones, the three most frequent ones? What do those look like?
So I find with definitely larger and more established organizations, traits I've seen quite often are the department of no. So the blocker attitude, or being very inflexible, that sort of feeling like, anyone comes to the cybersecurity team, the first answer is going to be no, and then the second answer is going to be no, and then it'll take you a long time to maybe even get to a maybe. So that kind of blocker attitude, and we can go into in a moment why I think that exists. The other one is, and it's related really, is fear. Fear of others, fear of your adversary, obviously cyber criminals, fear of the unknown. And then finally, the other thing is a hero mentality. They are all connected. So if we break that down, so I think the reason that a lot of cybersecurity teams have said, at the Department of No, is a historical one. For a long time now, we have been the most underfunded, underloved, under-resourced team in most organizations. And we've had to say no to a lot of things. Because one, either the technology hasn't been there until quite recently. Even when I started in cybersecurity, the tech was, the monitoring tools and things like that was a lot more rudimentary. Even in the last, few years, has just gone leaps and bounds. If you can afford it, great as well. That's another kind of thing. But then there's the other element of, because you're such a small team, you can't have oversight over everything. And so it's easier to say no. And I think a lot of cybersecurity teams find it really difficult to share that burden. And it's connected to the next point I said, with the fear. The fear of the unknown. Like, our adversaries are changing all the time, so it's really hard for us to protect against that. Our tech is constantly changing, and there is the misconception that cybersecurity professionals know everything there is to know about tech and have to know everything there is to know about tech, whereas we could really do with leveraging, for example, a JavaScript expert. I actually would rather they tell me how I go about securing something, and I can go, yeah, that sounds about right, and that's how I want to do it, because they're the experts in their domain. But the expectation, more often than not, is that the cybersecurity professional is supposed to come to said Java expert, who might not have even coded before, and say, oh, this is how you secure the system. And it's a real unfair expectation. And because there doesn't seem to be a two-way street of knowledge sharing, you think, well, if they're not interested in protecting things, then I'm going to kind of put up this barrier, this wall, this unbreakable wall, and not collaborate as well. And that's just the way humans are. But then the final thing, which, as I say, it's all connected, is because we have for so long felt like the only people that care about security, we develop a hero mentality. So even if those rare occasions, like where you have a security champion program, for example, or someone takes an interest in security, I think a lot of teams are now thinking like, but I'm the one that's supposed to protect the organization. It all falls to me, and therefore I don't really want to give up that halo effect. If so I can say I'm the one that protected the organization, not anyone else. And all that has quite a knock-on effect of how that team is perceived from the outsider's point of view, from another team culture's point of view. It's the way I like to think about it, and it plays into the anthropological framework of reciprocity, which I'll describe in a second. Imagine there's two islands next to each other, and one is island cybersecurity team, and one is island the rest of the organization. And if you're trying to trade with that island and they're not giving you anything in return, eventually you're going to go to war. Right? If you're not going to collaborate, then you're an enemy. Right? If you're these are two islands, and resources around these two islands are limited, and you're all struggling for the same goal, if you don't work together, you're only going to fight together. And reciprocity is one of the ways that you can counteract that. And it's one of the things that I go into organizations and teach a lot to the cybersecurity teams about. Reciprocity is the giving of gifts, basically. And we've been doing this ever since we could communicate with each other, with other with other tribes, with other cultures, other people. And it can be the literal giving of gifts, sometimes like a chocolate bar or something like that in a modern context. But more often than not, in a workplace context, it's the giving up of time, resources, and in a security a security landscape, it's the giving up of controls in a secure way, and the loosening of the reins. And what reciprocity does, and what reciprocity has shown us, is that when you give someone a gift, either a literal gift or a metaphorical gift, there is an innate human need for the other party to reciprocate,
Yes.
to give you a gift in return. That is the social order. But what's really nice about that social order is the other party always feels the need to over-reciprocate. And the example I like to give is when your friend or partner gives you a really, really thoughtful birthday present, like really thoughtful. It's not something they've just bought off the shelf. It's really thoughtful, maybe something handmade or something like that. And your first thought is, oh, that's a really lovely gift. Your second thought is, how am I going to top that for their birthday next year?
Absolutely.
That's
Yes.
your second
This,
thought.
this happens
How
a
am I going
lot.
to top it? And that is reciprocity. That is, over reciprocating. And if you keep building up relationships between each other where you just keep giving each other gifts and it just keeps it's almost like a positive arms race. You keep escalating those gifts. That relationship is going to be amazing. And I say the best gifts the cybersecurity team can give the organization is trust and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Trust them to make good security decisions. And you do that by education. You do that by support. Nobody can make good decisions if they don't know what they're dealing with. So, teach them as much as they want to know about cybersecurity in their area. Which, if you build up that trust, it will lead to autonomy. Now, we all seek autonomy in our daily lives, more so now than ever. Nobody likes to be told what to do, which is why you're seeing like a massive backlash of people saying, return to the office. No, I've had autonomy over my domain for this so long now.
You can't take it away.
You can't take it away. No. Autonomy is such an amazing gift. And we all seek it now that we're all quite an individualistic society. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a very positive way. We all seek to be able to feel like we have control over our work. And when we feel like we have control of our work, we do a better job. And can you imagine if we empowered people to feel like they had autonomy over their work, even in terms of cybersecurity, without that hero ego, without us going, oh, no, we've got to make all the decisions because I'm in charge, without that fear that someone's going to do something wrong. Imagine how much of a relief that would be on the cybersecurity team themselves. Again, that underfunded, under-resourced team that are constantly stressed, thinking about what's the next threat coming their way. If you can reduce some of that burden on them, you're going to have a happier cybersecurity team, which will then enable them. Eventually, I see a world where we have these not completely stress-free, but stress-free enough cybersecurity teams where eventually we might actually be able to start innovating more. Because at the moment, I think what is stopping us from innovating as a industry, to the extent that you see all the other areas, again, software development, data, AI, you see all these areas constantly innovating. We're so slow off the mark because we've got so much cultural baggage around us. We've not had that opportunity to kind of take a step back and a breather. The analogy is someone who's working 60 hours a week. When they come home from work, they don't have any time to kind of think, oh, how can I improve this? How can I do a better job? Because you're just constantly on the treadmill. So by building up that reciprocity, by building up trust and autonomy, giving people the feeling that we're all part of this, we're all fighting the same kind of common enemy, is going to free up the cybersecurity team. But it's not going to happen overnight. There is, as I say, a lot of cultural baggage about that fear, that historical fear that if we take our eyes off the ball, that's it, game over.
So true. And what I kept thinking when you were talking about teams, I kept seeing like, one single person in my mind. And these experiences that you described about feeling helpless, about feeling like you lack support, but still wanting to do the right thing and caring about it so much that so many people devote not just their job to, but so much of their personal time and energy into doing mentorships and talking in conferences and building communities and personal projects and so many things. That level of care and involvement can easily turn into frustration, can easily lead to someone feeling disgruntled or just hopeless and slightly cynical as well when they see that the people around them don't resonate. And that gap in connection that you described, that's also kind of creates that lack of reciprocity and that simple, just that disconnection between people. That is something I truly care about as well. And I think that that's why we need a lot more people who focus on and help others build their communication skills and build that muscle, not just to be empathetic and compassionate, but also to understand how you practice these, like on a very like day-to-day basis. Like, how do you use them? How do you use your listening skills to create space for the other person? How do we learn to be less judgmental and to kind of slowly work at just diffusing our instant reflex to become defensive and judgmental at the very first thing that people say? Because this is, again, this is a bit of a cliche, but it is true that the point is cooperation, which means that this requires a less ego focused type of approach and more a let's figure this out together, which always makes things more interesting. And people know this in cybersecurity because they do it all the time. They do it at conferences and projects and in things that they love. So we kind of all have these abilities. We all have the ability to connect, to reciprocate, to make these, like, to give these gifts and enter that virtuous cycle. But we're not really talking about them enough. Of course, that's changing, and I think you might agree with this, that things are definitely improving in this
Yes.
area. But like you said, it's not going to happen overnight, and we are going to need to not just talk about these things, but also help people actually figure out, like, how do I use this? What does this look like? So I'm wondering, in the team that you're part of, how have you seen things change, like from a like behavior, habit, day-to-day kind of dynamic? How have you seen things evolve with your input, with, you know, people becoming maybe a bit more open to like the bridge building kind of connection with their colleagues? I'd love to hear about your like feet on the ground experience.
Yeah. I guess the way I could draw first example to is the very first cybersecurity team I joined. And I remember day one walking in and I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Lianne. I'm joining the team. I'm going to be stock analyst." And just grunts. That's all I got. Grunts at me. Huh. I I was like, "Oh, that's odd. That's interesting." As I say, totally different experience to me being a software developer, where everyone was all like happy, cool, hip kind of thing. And I noticed that between them, they even as their own internal culture, they weren't getting along. And that was causing a lot of friction. So when anyone in the team would express an interest of self-development or improvement, it would get shot down by the internal tribe. And I thought that was really interesting because the more, and I'll say toxic, the environment, obviously there's no room to grow, because when we are faced with the threat of embarrassment or blame, we withdraw into ourselves. And if, as a team, for example, you keep withdrawing into yourselves, then how do you expect an outsider to break those barriers? And that's what we were seeing. Like nobody ever wanted to talk to us outside the cybersecurity. Well, nobody even in the cybersecurity team wanted to talk to us, but nobody outside the cybersecurity team wanted to talk to us. And then we were surprised why none of our recommendations were getting done, or why insecure behaviors continued to proliferate. It's because nobody wanted to engage. And so in doing the sort of, I initially did the participant observation kind of, I literally was part of that team because that's what, actually did. And a lot of anthropologists do this. Be wary, I would say, of new starters in any organization that take a lot of interest in the culture. It's probably a PhD anthropologist coming in, learning everything about it. They're some of my favorite books. Anthropological studies about workplace culture, where they've gone and had a job and stuff, are really interesting. And so I did the participant observation and kind of understood that there was a cultural dynamic there where it was bad habits, is the conclusion I came to. The bad habit was that anytime anyone said anything about personal development, improvement, or growth, they developed a really bad habit to shoot that down. And so it was my job to break that habit. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just it was years and years of this being in the way. And that's how you survived in that culture. It was about survival. That's how you survived in that culture. But what they needed was an outsider like myself to come in and break that norm.
How did you do that? I'm so curious about that because it's a difficult task to take on. I mean, you need to be not just brave, but also be able to face the resistance that people have for change, especially in a culture where they're already primed for judgment and for rejection. So I would love to like get the details of that.
So it started one-on-one, breaking it down on an individual basis. And so I would go out for coffees to lunch with people on the team and I would just talk. I'd just ask them questions about themselves. It's like, oh, so I would do it from a genuine place of curiosity, I should say. I joined the cybersecurity industry. I did want to know everything there was to know about it. I did want to know how they got to where they were just so I could learn from it too. But also, I wanted to know what their motivations were, what their dreams, their hopes, their ambitions were, what they found challenging, what they really struggled with. And, once I knew, like, oh, so-and-so wanted to go into threat intelligence eventually. So-and-so wanted to do this eventually. Or, I have dreams of becoming CISO one day. That kind of thing. And building upon that, once I understood, what were the drivers, the individual drivers, I could see similarities between people. And so when conversations would come up, and normally it'd be something that would get shot down, for example, like someone done a good piece of work. And normally if that would get shut down, I would turn around and say, that was a really good piece of work. Or I just kind of build up the team slowly that way and just break those bad habits. That the automatic reaction wasn't to make fun or chastise. The automatic reaction now was going to be praise. It was going to be camaraderie. It didn't happen overnight. And there was some resistance. And, doing, even that act myself doing that did lead to those behaviors to go, oh, let's make fun of this new person who's trying to be all positive about it. But eventually, it got to a point where actually people's confidence levels were rising up, slowly, that people were just like, no, I'm going to start praising you. And then by the time I left from a team that didn't even say good morning when you first came in, people knew their kids' names, when their birthdays were. And it was just a totally changed environment.
That's super heartwarming. I love stories like these, especially because it shows that this is something so doable. It feels like such a big challenge to affect change on a team and an organization, but it's not. It's not something that's like strategic and needs to be thought out and planned and put into a roadmap. It's just a matter of taking a true, like genuine interest in the other person and figuring out what's bothering them and what they're lacking and what their fears are. Just like you mentioned, you pointed out some really good areas that we could all look at when having conversations with people.
Yeah.
And good managers listening to this would probably say, like, this is good management. But good management doesn't come easily, because you first have to do that with yourself. You have to have those conversations with yourself so you can have them with others, because otherwise it can be quite challenging. So in doing this, I imagine that you yourself like went through, um, there may be perhaps this experience brought up some things for you personally. So I was wondering, like, the more time you spend working on this transformation and helping others on their way, what did that bring out for you personally, and how did that kind of build or just kind of create momentum for your path forward?
This was a good way of introducing new cultural norms when other teams started engaging with us for the first time in ages. When people actually started wanting to reach out. When people started knowing our names. When the metaphorical and physical barriers went down. You know, there was literally a line people didn't want to cross to come and talk to us. And I knew that that's when that change was happening. And for me, I think also being able to apply it to individuals in the organization and build up that relationship there. So not only just being, I had to be the agent for change in the team to start with. And I say, and this pretty much builds upon the framework when I go into new organizations now, as a consultant, to come in and say, well, one thing I get asked as a consultant is, I'd like you to change the cybersecurity culture in my organization. I say, great. But it starts with you, cybersecurity team. And they go, no, we know everything there is to know about cybersecurity culture. You don't have to tell us anything. You don't, it's everyone else that's in the wrong.
Of course.
Yeah. And so I always turn around and say, if it's not you, then you're the one that's driving the message about cybersecurity behaviors, then could it not be that's the reason why the cybersecurity culture isn't working? And I always say it starts with you. Always. Cybersecurity culture always starts with cybersecurity. It cannot start anywhere else. You might say it starts with the top. No, it doesn't. It starts literally with the team. They are the messengers for that program. And if you are not ready to go out there and build that culture because your own team isn't ready to go build that culture because you can't work together, like the example I just gave then, you cannot go out and expect people to want to be receptive to your message. It has to start with the cybersecurity team, always. And then you build that message out. Whether you build it top and then down, or whether you do it down and then top, it always starts with the cybersecurity team.
It does, and that leads me to an important point I know you talk about a lot, and which for which I appreciate you so much. It is the issue of language and how we phrase things. It starts with cybersecurity, because when you have a cybersecurity professional on the news talking about a breach, and they say the human is the weakest link, because that's so easy,
Yeah.
such an easy thing to do, and the stereotype that makes my blood boil as well.
Me too.
That's what because it sounds so bombastic. It sounds so big and so lofty and so like definitive, and it comes from a professional. So of course everyone's gonna start like repeating it over and over again, and then it gets cascaded all over the place. And then that said security professional cannot see that what they said actually comes back to bite them, simply because people don't want to be told that they're stupid and incompetent and that it's their fault. And all of the like blame culture that we have in this language it does such a big disservice to cybersecurity in general. So how the company talks in the company itself, it's just like if a customer support team talks about users it puts them in a bad light and talks about customers. Oh, they're so incompetent, they're so bad. How a company treats their customers and how their customer support the staff speak about customers, that permeates the entire culture. that spreads through the entire thing. And as much as we're like, we invest so much in this community and in this industry into connecting the cause to the effect, when it comes to language and behavior, we're not that good at it. We don't really see that connection. So I think that that's where anthropology, with this perspective and the tools and concepts, plays such an important part on creating clarity and kind of bringing these up from like the day-to-day tapestry of things, and spotlighting like what you do here affects all of this, all of the thinking, all of the decision making, and all of the daily habits that people have.
Language and storytelling is the crux of human culture. It's the crux of human existence. It's one of the main drivers of our evolution. You know, we outlived all the other um, types of hominids, you know, and we became the successful one because of our ability to communicate with language. Doesn't mean we always get it right. but but the importance cannot be understated, especially for anthropologists. And we have the potential in cybersecurity to be amazing storytellers, but we need to be trained in how to be good storytellers. We've lost that ability. It's a bit like, there's the argument when you say someone's creative. I don't know about you, but when someone says that, I automatically think someone who could probably be really good at drawing. Maybe can play an instrument, you know? That's not creativity. Creativity doesn't actually mean that everyone is creative in some way. You know, we make a decision, and that's a creative decision. So, you know, you in your car notice, oh, there's traffic overhead. I'm going to actually go down a side street instead. That's a creative decision. Yeah. But because we see creativity in kind of lofty terms as like, oh, you win a BAFTA to be creative, you know, it's all pretty and shiny. We tend to outsource the idea of creativity to other departments. But we all are great innate storytellers because we all share a cultural language. You know, at the basic level of human existence, because we all have fears. We all have uncertainties and we all have doubts, which leads to FUD. However, I don't think FUD is a great method for us to keep using. And it's something we use a lot in cybersecurity. You know, don't click on that because you'll lose all your money. And the problem with constantly relying on FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as a narrative storytelling technique is the same way it works now. We hear in the news all the time about horrific things happening. The only thing we can do is say, that's really sad. Because we hear it so constantly now that we're almost desensitized to it. It has to be out of completely extremes before we kind of get that really emotional twinge. And that's just one of the sad parts of being constantly bombarded with information. Now, because we're constantly bombarded with information, which includes, hey, you click on that, you're stupid. Hey, your employees, they're the weakest link. That does trickle down and that has a massive impact. I mean, as going back to the autonomy piece, nobody likes to be told that they're doing a bad job. And again, it's all about that uncertainty that a lot of cybersecurity teams feel. And it's easier to dismiss individuals, dismiss other employees, and say that they're incapable of understanding cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is easy. It's one of the biggest lies we tell people is that it's complex. It's not.
I love this. I love this so much. I love this. I don't hear this enough. People don't speak about it enough. It doesn't have to be this big thing. Thank you for saying that.
Do you know why it's not complex? I'll give you an example. Think about your house, right? You're going to leave for the day. The ritual of you putting your key in that lock and turning it is so ritualized, you don't even think about it. And you know if you're going out, you've locked the windows. You've got home insurance. If you're going on holiday, you might let a neighbor know, keep an eye out. We can ritualize our protection, and we can do it without thinking. However, if I were to come in and say, go to your house and say, oh, well, well, I can jimmy this lock, I could do this, I could do that, and scare you into thinking that you can't protect yourself, you're going to have a totally different reaction. And you might think, actually, I'm really helpless anyway, so why bother? You know. And if we keep telling people they're helpless, they will be helpless. They will act helpless. They will do insecure behaviors that will put them at risk. However, if we give them an empowering message saying, you are in control of your data most of the time, if you follow these rules of like just being careful with it, do you have to give all your details to this mysterious app? Could you put in some fake details into this mysterious app because you don't need it? Things like you don't always have to put your actual date of birth in stuff or things like that, your actual address to access services. Don't click on that and tell them why, but in an empowering way. Is like, you do have control. And if something does happen, the empowering way of these are the steps you can take to get back to a secure state. But we don't tell those messages. Instead, we just scare people to death and scare people so much that they literally put their heads in the sand and say, there is no way I can protect myself against this. And therefore, I will outsource that risk to you, cybersecurity team. And again, that cylindrical cycle, the cybersecurity team gets all the burden of protection, develops that hero ego, develops that mistrust of others because obviously they don't care, therefore I've got to take on all this burden. Oh, wait a minute, there's not enough of us, can't keep my eyes on everything, we've missed something. It's just this narrative just keeps playing out.
Yes.
And
yes.
One thing I would like to also mention is our language with victimization in cybersecurity is really unusual. And it reminds me, and it's not an easy topic to discuss, it's the same victimization language we use when a woman says that she's been raped. Now, we blame, quite often in the media, we blame the woman and say, well, she must have been dressed provocatively. She brought it on herself. Now, going back to talking about if a burglar came and broke into my house, my physical house, even if I'd left the window open, right, and they came in through the window, you would feel empathy for me. You'd be like, oh, a criminal came in and stole your things. Oh, you'd be so mad at the criminal. You'd be feeling so sorry for me, even if I'd made a mistake, right? But when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber criminals doing something wrong, it's the victim that gets blamed. It's the organization that became under attack that gets blamed. It's them. They're the problem. Not these criminals that are making an absolute min on our data and stealing all our money. No, they're untouchable. But it's the victims, and we need to stop that language because it's doing us no favors. Because what happens is, and we've seen this with other crimes, like I mentioned, those reporting rates go down. People lose faith in the system that protects them. They stop reporting it, and then we don't know what's going on out there. And if we don't know what's going on out there, how are we going to protect ourselves from something similar happening? Because we need to keep fostering this communication line. We need to keep learning about how did they get in? What did they do? What was the impact? If we can't talk about this stuff in a more open forum where we're not finger wagging either at organizations and literally cybersecurity professionals doing it to other cybersecurity people and finger wagging and saying, oh, cybersecurity team, you've done wrong. Look at me. And then next week you get breached. We can't learn. And if we're not learning from each other, then we're going to be weaker. We're never going to get anywhere ahead of the cyber criminals doing this.
It's such a good perspective that we're mad at the wrong people. And because we can't scream in cyber criminals' faces and punish them the way that we want to, because there's a faceless entity that we can't reach and we can't physically like exert all of this, release all of this pent up anger and frustration and onto them, then we just choose the ones closest to us. It's such a similar, I can't help notice, but in all of the stories you've described and the examples you've shared, all of these situations are so familiar to us. It happens to us. If something at work makes us mad, we don't go screaming at our coworker. Instead, we come home and perhaps pick a fight with our partner. And this is such a familiar scene. So if we can't figure out who attacked us and just, again, punish them, we're just going to go to the security team and take the blame on them. And that creates that rift, because nothing unites people like a common enemy, but we're not uniting against cyber criminals enough. Instead, we're fighting amongst each other about who's right and who has the most authority and who has the most responsibility and things like that, instead of acknowledging that things are imperfect and yes, things are complex and interdependent and we can't operate in a vacuum and no one knows all the things. And this is just an acknowledgement that comes with being an adult in life in any situation. It's cybersecurity is not special in its behaviors and patterns to other types of industries, to other types of behaviors. Yes, it is applied to a new evolving really quickly context, and it does bring like interaction between humans and technology in a light that we haven't seen so far, and we're still exploring and understanding that, and that's a bit more compassion we could do with it in that particular area. But you've shared, I'm really really grateful for these examples you've shared, because again, they feel so familiar and they're so easy to understand. I I'm so glad you said this about rituals, about all of these elements coming together, because I want us to get mad at the right people. I want
Yeah,
us to get more mad at cyber criminals. That will mobilize our resources to think more creatively, to make like stronger bonds, to get over that like communication gap and go tell people like, hey, I read this and I'm really curious about this and I want to do something about it. Like, how can I help? I don't have to be a technical pro to do this. Like, how can I help? How can I like translate something? How can I, help you send out an email that people will love to read, and all of the other things. There's so much room for people to contribute with their own skills from where they are, without any sort of imagined barriers to this.
absolutely. That is the dream, pretty much. I mean, it's not an unusual problem we've been facing. I had just a little bit of flashback when you were talking then about what must have been the industry conversations been like in the wild wild west when 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 bandinos were coming in and they were stealing from banks, literally the big sacks of money. And they must have, in the banking industry then, the old fashioned banking industry, going, okay, so what kind of bars shall we put in place? What kind of safes shall we make to sort of do that? These are not new things we're talking about. We've always been under threat. We always will be under threat. It's just the tools that have changed. And how we collaborate will just put us into good stead of how we kind of carry on facing this impact. Now, I suppose the difference between, you know, bandits stealing from old tiny banks and things like that, and bank robberies in general, until everything's just moved to zeros and ones nowadays. Difference is that the individual impact, that kind of scope, that kind of threat, and the loss of personal data, the loss of personal wealth, and things like that. And reputational damage is a big one that we don't talk about much as well. The things like, so it's an oldie but a goodie example. The Ashley Madison case, when
Oh,
people
yes.
were the website that encouraged you to have affairs, and dating website, and that detail gets leaked and marriages break up, people commit suicide over it, little things like that. And how it impacts the individual is going to be really crucial. And we take cues from everything around us. Culture extends from the culture of the country that I'm in right now, the county I'm in. So I'm in Yorkshire. I'm a very proud Yorkshire woman. It comes with a lot of Yorkshire stereotypes, which I do partake in, I must admit. Then I've got my city identity. Then I've got my suburb identity where I live. I've got my whole work identity. I've got my friendship identity. I've got my identity with my partner. I've got all the other cultural signifiers from birth, all those cultural indications from where I come. We are incredibly culturally rich and complex. And we need to recognize, if we're ever going to communicate with people, that everyone has so much cultural baggage with them. Now, where we're going wrong in our cybersecurity message is that one-size-fits-all approach. And so I have seen, and I've been privy to, organizations all throughout my career before cybersecurity and beyond, where I join an organization and I do security awareness training. And I receive the same security awareness training as someone who works on the sales floor, as someone who is the CTO, and everyone in between. And that message is exactly the same. But my drivers will be different. Not only just because maybe the work I'm doing is different, but also just my experiences of life will be different. Now, I'm not saying that you have to create a bespoke security awareness program for everyone, but there is definitely mileage in thinking, well, maybe I'll create a program for this group. Maybe I'll create a program for this group and this group. What do they really care about? Because in a world where very few people seem to not care about cybersecurity, finding that hook is going to be incredibly important.
As a, let's say, round up to this wonderful conversation that I wish, honestly, did not have to end in any way. I could keep talking to you for hours, and I enjoy listening to your podcast and
Oh,
just
thank you.
going through your work. I find such energy and inspiration and the right words to put in certain situations. I was wondering if you'd share with me like an experience where you are on the receiving end of an empathetic gesture or behavior that really that made you like stop in your tracks and really like enjoy it and be present in that connection.
There was a wonderful opportunity I got. So I worked for in cybersecurity for the NHS, which is the National Health Service. And I was able to be a part of a leadership group, and I was the only non-clinician there. So I was surrounded by doctors, nurses, pharmacists. Totally different experience to what I did on day to day. I was in an office. Yeah. They were dealing with the front line, very high stress job. And they were asking me, what did I do for the NHS? It was pretty obvious what they did, but what did I do for the NHS? I said I worked in cybersecurity, and they turned around to me like, oh, big sigh. You're the one that keeps telling me that I should change my password every 2 minutes. You're the one that keeps doing this, that. And I just listening to this, and I explained, to them, what I did and why we were doing it. And they said, well, it's all very well and good, Lianne, but I don't need tech to be able to treat patients. We've been doing it for a long time without treating people to, without tech to treat patients. I said, that's true. But before I joined the organization, there was a big incident called WannaCry that absolutely decimated our National Health Service. And it caused a big chunk of our healthcare infrastructure to completely shut down. And things did happen. Now, there's been no recorded deaths according to the into the investigation or anything like that, but things did happen. And I said, that is very true, but imagine an instance where you're trying to treat someone and you don't have their medical history and you don't know what pills they're on, what medication they're on, or what effect it'll have, and what will be the impact if you misdiagnose, mistreat someone. And they got very quiet. I said, it's very simple cybersecurity hygiene that would have prevented things like that from happening. And we're only asking you to do the very basics. We're not asking you to do anything complex. And, because it isn't really. It's like, some might say there's cognitive load, but really, relatively speaking, again, it's all about habits, all about ritual. It's things we could get hold of. And when I kind of explained it that way, they turned around and was like, "Oh, I've been thinking for so long about financial implications of impacts of a cybersecurity incident on the healthcare system," which doesn't really kind of. And the reason why they didn't care is because in the UK it doesn't really apply because we pay for it through tax. We don't pay for it at the source. We don't go into hospital and pay for it. And so they were just thinking, oh, cybersecurity equals financial crime. Like, no, there's other
Yes.
elements to it. Like, and once we kind of had this amazing discussion, so I understand where they were coming from, and they understood where I was coming from, and there was a silence for ages, and they just turned around and says, "We'll do better. We'll do better going forward." And it was just through us having a conversation, going, "No, I get it. I get that you have this, amazing drive, this vocation to treat people, to look after people, and tech shouldn't be the driver of that." It's like, but please let me enable you to carry on delivering what you need to deliver. And the way I can do that is just by you just helping me out a little bit with these. And they might seem like silly rules to you, but they have such an impact. And it was just understanding the challenges of both our jobs that came to that consensus. And I think it was literally, it was like we were sat in a circle. So it was literally like a sharing group where we were discussing this. And that was such a powerful moment for me that I knew that the art of storytelling on both counts was going to be the way that we encourage people to be interested in cybersecurity.
And you are so fantastic at this. And I'm so grateful that we have you and other people like you in this community to tell these stories, to tell them with true passion, with true generosity, and with so much soul that they resonate so far beyond what we can see. And I'm such a just a genuine believer in the like cumulative effect of all of these stories being told, and all of the people taking their like time out of their lives, and dedicating this precious time to others in the form of stories and presentations and videos and whatever sorts of creative endeavors they choose to so generously share with the community, because I do believe that this will create momentum and change. And we are seeing the effects of that. And it gives me so much more energy to continue to do this. And again, I'm so grateful to have you here, and you so deserve in so many ways, not just all of the accolades that you have, including like Cybersecurity Woman of the Year and another nomination, but you absolutely deserve a community that's not just part of cybersecurity, but so many people outside of it who are interested in this and perhaps would like to contribute in some way in the future. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of these stories and examples with us, and all your knowledge. It was absolutely wonderful. I loved every minute of it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. My big ambition is to leave the cybersecurity industry in a better place than I found it. So if talking about anthropology and cybersecurity is the way to do it, then I think that's a absolutely just way to do it.
You're already doing that. So thank you for that.